Shalom. Let me get straight into this lesson. It's going to be a continuation from the lesson I did yesterday to get back into this devil, Leonardo da Vinci. And let me show you something real quick. It says Leonardo da Vinci was an Italian polymath of his high Renaissance who excelled in many fields, including painting, sculpting, architecture, engineering, inventing, and science. So this devil work is influenced inside of the science of these devils society and also the medical field. So it's a lot, that have to be another lesson. So let's get more back into this information. So like my voice kind of in and out, so kind of bear with me. Matter of fact, let's pull a scripture because I didn't get a chance to hit a scripture last lesson. Right? It says I think this Luke 8:17. Luke 8:17. It says the phrase "nothing is hidden that will not be revealed" is a common saying often found in religious and philosophical contexts, Salakia, that conveys the idea that ultimately all truths will be uncovered and made known. It suggests that secrets and concealed information will eventually come to light, so it's going to be made known to the elect, to the people that's trying to wake up. So let me show you something else real quick. Like I was telling you, I did this in another lesson, going into these Renaissance painters, and that's how you got the characters' names from the movie Ninja Turtles. They put it right in your face, but people are so dumbed down or just ignorant of it, they don't know what's going on. So that's how you got the Ninja Turtles characters off these four prominent Renaissance painters, and there was a lot more, but these were the major ones: Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Donatello, and Raphael, right here at the bottom. So let's get more back into this breakdown on this. Let's go here. So I'm gonna start, get back into this. It says point 3. So what I did is the last lesson that I did, I went more on those 3.3 and 4, and I elaborated more on it to break it down so you can really get it. It says point 3. It says Christianity originated in the Middle East, which again, the Middle East is a new concept. There's no such thing as the Middle East. Esau Edom, the so-called white man, renamed that region, Asia, the Middle East to control the narrative. And you're going to see a common thread, a common theme with these devils, rearranging words, adding new definitions to words, taking existing definitions from words, and also making up words as they go. In all their literature, that's why it's so much confusion. And you have to have the spirit to guide you. So let's get all into this. It says not Europe, and Europe is named after this goddess named Europa. That region is Asia, but they renamed it Europe, and they renamed what you know as the Middle East, but that's Asia. It says Yahweh, they got Jesus, was not European. So European is new speak. I'm going to always correct this so you can break those bad habits, because Jake like to repeat these words, but you have to put it in proper context. European, these are Edomites. They renamed themselves Europeans, the British, white, Caucasian, so on and so forth. It says Yahweh Shai was not European. So what are they saying? He wasn't a so-called white man. It's going to get deeper though. It says historically and geographically, geographically, Yahweh Shai, they got Jesus, was born in Bethlehem, modern day Palestine / Israel. So I don't even want to get into that history. It's going to stay on subject. It says raised in Nazareth, a poor, rural, Jewish, which would be Israelite town. They got this hijack of this word Jewish and Jew. It says a first century so-called Jew. He was a Hebrew Israelite from the tribe of Judah, Yahweh, in the proper Hebrew tongue. He spoke Hebrew. He didn't speak Latin or English. It says part of Semitic, it's supposed to be Shamitic. They got Semitic, right? They created this new word to control the narrative. Shamitic ethnic group, meaning he would have had olive or brown skin. You hear this? But this ain't what you shown in modern day Christian art. But I'm gonna show you why. Let's keep going. It says the Roman Empire later hijacked the faith. Well, actually, Constantine, to get this correct, Constantine was an Israelite. So what he did is you had a lot of Israelites that was doing wickedness. They tried to mix in our customs and culture inside of a pagan system. So Constantine was a so-called black man, but he intertwined the paganism of the pagan Roman Empire into the Holy Roman Empire, which the Holy Roman Empire was ruled by Israelites. It says, after centuries of persecution, the Roman Empire legalized then adopted Christianity under Emperor Constantine, 313 AD. That began a slow transformation. It says Christianity became Romanized, stripped from its Israelite identity. It says European art, customs, philosophy replaced the original Shemitic culture of Yahushua. So they started to do this around the Renaissance, right? The late 1400s, give or take into the 1600s. So this is when they started doing this. But prior to that, when the Israelite Constantine, took over, they had brown skinned images of the saints of Yahushua. It wasn't later until the Edomites got back into power when they whitewashed everything. It says eventually Rome became the center of the Christian world via the Catholic Church. It says point 4, control of image, control of narrative. I went to that yesterday, but I want to elaborate more on that so you can get more edification. It says this is where things turn from mistaken identity to manipulation and power. It says image is power, and they knew it. It says when Europeans, Edomites, began portraying Yahushua, Mary, and the apostles as so-called white, it wasn't just bad history. It was psychological warfare, which I always say. The mind is where the battlefield is at for what you think and what you don't think. Psychological warfare, when they started to whitewash the images. When you see that image in your mind, most people see him as a so-called white man. But when we see the Messiah in our mind, we see him as a so-called black man. You have to make that transformation. It says, check this out. It says visual art in churches, cathedrals, books, and later film and media were used to present so-called whiteness as divine, pure, and godly. Do you hear this? The same people that raped, robbed, killed, destroyed, made you convert to their style of Christianity. These are the people that you look at as being divine. They did a hell of a mind job on the world. It says, subtly implied that none so-called white people are spiritually lesser. Justify colonial rule, slavery, and racial oppression by saying, look, even God looks like us, right? Let's keep going. It says colonialism spread the so-called white Jesus. It says during European colonization of so-called Africa, Asia, and the Americas, missionaries brought images of white Jesus as part of their efforts to civilize indigenous people. Do you hear this? It says missionaries brought images of white Jesus as part of their efforts to civilize indigenous people. These images told colonized people God looks like your oppressor. It says converts often adopted these images subconsciously. You hear this? So most of our people have that so-called image of Cesare Borgia in their mind to this very day. It says associating holiness with so-called white skin. They're not the color white. That's another misconception and a major lie. That's the witchcraft on most of the people's minds. They're red people. It says this wasn't just religion, it was a tool of empire. Spiritual and racial control went hand in hand. Let's keep going. It says psychological effects on communities of color, so called blacks, so called Hispanics, and so called Native Americans, which make up the bulk of the 12 tribes of Israel. It says even today, they continue worship. Check this out. This heavy. This your grandmother, this your auntie. This is all the tribes in a nutshell right here. Your girlfriend, your baby mother. It says even today, the continued worship of a European looking so-called Jesus has deep psychological consequences. It says children of color grow up seeing so-called white figures as holy and powerful. That's a hell of a psychological warfare. It says self-worth and spiritual identity are affected. It says subconsciously believing they're farther from God. It says next point. It reinforces internalized racism even within religious communities, and that's what you see. Our people have picked these images up and these doctrines from their slave master, and that's what you have today in the modern day so-called Black, Hispanic, and Native American Christian church. You know what I'm saying? That's what you got. This is the setup. It says this is why many so-called Black, indigenous, and global majority Christians are now re-examining their faith and asking. Let's keep going. It says right here. It says create art, theological that reflects the diversity of the faith origins. Right here. It says, because if you change the image of God, you begin to change how people see themselves in the story. That's why when we tell our people they the Israelites, they don't believe it because all this heavy indoctrination. Now we know where it comes from. We know the way they think. It's final thought. It says the distortion of so-called Jesus image wasn't just artistic. It was political, colonial, and psychological. It says reclaiming the truth about Christianity roots help break the illusion that divinity belongs to so-called whiteness and restores dignity to the global communities who've always been a part of the story. So this is our book. The Bible is our history. They stole it and acting like they us. That's why when they teach it, don't make any sense. If you can kind of comprehend on the level, you understand what they're telling you don't make sense. When they tell you so-called God is all love, but you look at Yahweh track record of killing people, destroying people, you'll see that's not true. The Most High kills, He make alive, He wound, He heals. So that was a heavy way that was broken down. So again, going back into these painters during the High Renaissance, when they would whitewash the world with these images that's still implanted in most of our people mind today. It says, yes, images are often considered more impactful and memorable than words, especially in conveying emotional and complex ideas. So these painters, right, gave you they painted a narrative in your mind of these biblical stories, and they've been whitewashed first off, and then they give you a narrative like the snake, right? And Adam and Eve being two so-called white people, and they painted a snake and gave it to you, and they said Eve ate an apple. That's all nothing but a lie, right? That's all witchcraft. There was an image created to give you the perception. Then when you read those scriptures, that's what you're going to imagine in your mind. That's all heavy witchcraft. So everything, all these images that you've been saw, you got to scrub them. So you got to read the Bible as with no images in mind. Now, when you start to rebuild your imagery bank, you got to envision these people being so-called black. And a lot of these things, these narratives, didn't happen the way you saw them on the portrait and through the movies and so on and so forth. Hopefully, this lesson has been edifying. Call Allah Yahweh Bahashem Yahushua Bahashim Rakak Kodash Shalom.